Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I'm Skylar.
And I'm Amber.
And this week, we are discussing Series 5, Episode 10, Vincent and the Doctor by Richard Curtis. So apparently, I don't know, I'm not that familiar with the rest of Curtis's work. This is his sole Doctor Who writing credit. However, apparently he's, a big, he's written a lot of, rom-coms and shit, and he wrote, Love Actually and shit like that. And I will say it's interesting because this episode is very decidedly not that, but I really do appreciate the tone and the vibe that it has. It's kind of an episode where it's despite the subject matter, a lot of the episode feels like it's just kind of about chilling the fuck out before we get to the finale.
Yeah, no. I didn't know that this guy was a rom-com guy, but now that you said that, I'm totally okay, yeah, no, I get those vibes.
Yeah.
Just the very sort of sappy emotional core to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
He wrote the story for the Mamma Mia sequel. So
Nice.
Another example, but yeah, I would say the best, this is going off into a sort of tangent, but the best romantic comedies know how to get those really high highs, whether they be emotional or the comedy, and also the lows when things have to get more serious and you need more character development stuff. And I think that balance is struck almost perfectly in this episode.
Yeah, and it's admittedly you get next week's episode does that too, but next week's episode is also written by Ansem Seeker of Darkness and has Craig. What I'm saying is that I'd pick this one pretty much any time you ask. It would be
oh yeah,
yeah. And it's also, I guess I probably will go a little bit more in depth this week because I think there's a lot more to talk about this time. But one thing that I feel like I really noticed, and I've watched this episode twice this year already because I did a watch through of the whole season back when I first got my Blu-ray copy, and again now. And something that really struck me is how it kind of defies the established tropes that the celebrity historicals were doing. When you think about the fact that, admittedly, part of this is just because it's Van Gogh, but, how, the fact that, the Doctor and Amy are all, totally, it's straight up, Shakespeare Code or Unicorn and the Wasp, and it genuinely, it weirds Vincent the fuck out, and he's and makes him very uncomfortable, and a lot of the time leads to a lot of the emotional conflict in the episode. And it's I like that because even the celebrity historical episodes that we liked, we kind of gave them shit for how obvious they are, or how kind of they feel it's tonally more hey, look at this person, and not acknowledging it. They can't ever be an actual character because they're here to be a famous person. And whereas here it feels like Vincent is an actual character.
Yeah, it plays kind of with those historical, or at least the RTD historical tropes, where it's there's a person and they're famous and they're pretty much everything you could imagine them to be, except maybe one or two flaws, and they might have a darkness within them, but really it's their tortured soul is creating beauty, and they win out in the end. And here they do that, but they make you feel the darkness, and it isn't one of those oh, my tortured passion creates beauty. It isn't
actually,
trying to be that.
And it's not even yes, Vincent obviously has the same mental health issues that he would have had in real life, but when he talks about his art, he's not like I'm the tortured soul. He almost has like a like a like a autism spectrum moment where he just like is like, I need to talk about this wonderful, all the colors and everything, and it's very much played differently.
It definitely read to me as like synesthesia.
Yeah,
I hear the
Yeah,
colors.
but yeah, he's just very human in his writing,
yeah,
and definitely most of the time what you get with the historicals is a character that's very and you know, because you get this with historical perceptions of people, is you get a very polished view of them with maybe like, and you know, they were kind of an asshole as a footnote.
yeah,
Whereas here it's very much like Vincent van Gogh being really a mess is sort of central to his historical image,
yeah,
and so that's definitely a part of it. And then a part of it is just that like very, you know, human writing you get
yeah,
from sort of the emotional core that the writer brings to this episode, and it's just very effective.
yeah. As
What
I said,
helps?
it's allowing Van Gogh to be an actual human character as opposed to basically just a famous face. And I feel like the only other like historical that I can think of off the top of my head that did that would have been Haunting of Villa Diodati, where like it's not quite the same, but like Lord Byron and Shelley are like actual characters instead of just being, ooh, look at this famous person, or actually ironically enough, though nowhere near, to a lesser extent, Tesla too.
Yeah.
I think.
I respect this episode a lot because I think I never really noticed it until like going through with like super analysis mode on, but um with like Shakespeare Code, for example, or even the Wasp
Unicorn
episode.
and the
I'm
Wasp.
forgetting.
Unicorn and the
Yes.
Wasp.
Yeah, even with those characters, it's like the Doctor, there's like a distance between the Doctor, the companion, and the famous historical person where it's like almost put on a pedestal, and there's also sort of like a, I can't describe it in any other way as like a fandom relationship with. It's like the
Yeah,
Doctor and the companion will have this parasocial thing, and then the comedy comes from the historical figure not really ever figuring out completely what the fuck they're on about. But here it's like,
yeah.
I believe Eleven and Amy are friends with Vincent.
Yeah.
It goes
I mean,
beyond just
yeah,
that
eventually,
you're
and
cool
obviously
thing.
they obviously do kind of start off doing exactly that. And when Vincent is like, "What do you mean you want to buy my painting? Like, what the fuck, dude?"
Yeah. But it like, yeah, it changes and it doesn't stay that way, which like I think that makes sense. But yeah.
And I think that's part of what makes him very human in this episode, is that he is able to like catch up, and I think that's something pretty like specific to someone like Vincent, who is, you know, if when you're fucking crazy, you're more willing to accept shit. Um, and so he just sort of, he's like, yeah, like of course, like these guys are like, they're weird as shit. I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I guess so we start off in the Musée d'Orsay um with the Doctor and Amy visiting the Van Gogh exhibition, and I do like that it kind of plays into last week, whereas Amy's like, "Hey, why are you being like really nice to me?" Um and there's sort of that kind of going in the background the entire episode of like, despite it being kind of a laid back, like it still doesn't lose sight of the arc, but also it doesn't feel like it needs to like jam a crack in there. It's just kind of like, yeah, Amy's like sort of subconsciously still reeling from the loss of Rory, even if she can't remember it. Um, and of course, Bill Nye, who I believe was long like a kind of like he was someone who everyone always thought like, oh yeah, he's got to be in the running to be the Doctor. being there, and they kind of play it up, I feel like, in that he's not like, he's obviously not the Doctor, but they're definitely playing up some like doctorish tropes for him, and like the bow tie is absolutely intentional.
Yeah.
Um and they notice something weird. I will say if I have one problem with this episode, it is the thing right here where it's like super contrived, where like Eleven's just like, I know evil when I see it, and I see it in that painting, and looking at the monster, and it's just like, okay, man.
Yeah, that one was like, okay. Like, I will say the premise for the episode is pretty flimsy. He,
Yeah.
like, sees a face in a Van Gogh painting, and instead of being like, oh, I guess he just, like, was painting a shadow or something, it's like, no, we must investigate immediately.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a silly little intro, and it doesn't
Yeah.
really affect anything.
It's one of those things where, like, obviously, like, the setup is contrived, but it's workable because the actual thematic content of the episode and the acting is good enough to counterbalance the contrived setup, which is something the current administration of the show could learn something from. Haha, Chibnall bad, take a shot.
I think part of why I'm able to just, like, completely overlook that is that they come back to the museum.
Yeah.
And so it's like it just creates a
It's
through
not a
line.
completely purposeless framing device. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. So yeah, they go back to I believe the late 1800s, like the
1890.
or 1890. And are like, all right, we're gonna go figure out what the fuck is up. And like, it's weird too how, like, I think because the episode grounds itself, when it does do the obvious nods, like the cafe or Vincent holding his self-portrait or the Starry Night scene, it works more than just Ten and Donna saying Agatha Christie titles. And it works better than, like,
Ten giving Shakespeare his lines.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's also that. You never get the sense that it's like, oh, they're inspiring Vincent. It's just they're there while Vincent finds his own inspiration, which is something that I like, because there's always been, like, it's weird to say that, like, I mean, it is disrespectful, but it's weird to say that, like, oh, this is disrespectful to this long dead figure or whatever, especially when they're not necessarily like a marginalized voice or whatever. Like, Ten giving Shakespeare lines is different than than them being like, yeah, the Doctor went back in time and gave Octavia Butler writing advice. Like, that would be so tone deaf. But it's still always been something that's made me, like, deeply uncomfortable when they do it, and they don't do it here.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of cool how well they strike that balance, because you could argue that the Doctor impacts Vincent's life the most by taking him to the future to see how his works are remembered, and Ten doesn't do that for any of the historical people he comes across. Yet this feels more respectful in a way, because it's never 11 saying, like, oh, did you ever think about painting it like this? Like, that doesn't happen. In fact, that's, like, made fun of.
The one time when he does, where he's like, yeah, you should go paint the church. Vincent's like, dude, what the fuck? Stop. And it takes the actual, like, the monster to show up for Vincent to be like, yeah, okay, I'll go do it. So yeah, and of course we are first introduced to Vincent having the obvious reputation that the reputation of, like, oh, nobody liked him, everybody thought his paintings were stupid. Although there is one thing, I'm not a particularly big art buff, but didn't Vincent have, like, peers that he hung out with who also did sort of weird avant-garde for the time painting styles?
art history is one of the avenues of stuff that I never really got into when I was a history major, so I can't say for certain, unfortunately. But that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, we got no idea.
Even then, even if it's not historically accurate, like, it is part of the things that makes the episode work. So, yeah. And it doesn't, like, admittedly, it's maybe not, it maybe, like, it wasn't quite as, like, oh, he's, like, miserable and lonely or whatever, but it still manages to get his mental health struggles across, and how everyone scorned him for his mental health struggles when they should have helped him. And how much, like, the kindness of the Doctor and his and Amy's help did mean to him. So yeah. You ever, like, it's kind of a weird thing that, like, sometimes Doctor Who does this, where it's like the TARDIS translation circuits where it's like, okay, let's make Vincent have a Scottish accent.
That's a good gag.
And I think it's just supposed to be to, like, draw the connection to Amy. And also they did cast a Scottish actor, I believe, but
yeah, it was in that very same scene when I noticed that like Amy and Vincent take to each other, like, pretty much right away. I was just thinking, it was an amusing thought in my head that, like, her type includes Vincent van Gogh and Rory in, like, the same ballpark, and I'm just like, you know what? I'm okay with that. Like, that weirdly fits.
Yeah, and it's a little bit manic pixie dream girl-ish, but, you know, it's nowhere near as bad as Clara going on about her and Jane Austen, which it's like, yeah. I don't hate Clara, but there are definitely parts of Clara that it's just like...
Yeah, and, like, again, like, it's even... Obviously, the racism with Shakespeare and Martha is, like, no bueno, but, like, you could argue that this had way more potential to, like, go south, and yet it never does. You just get the sense that, I don't know, she's enjoying it. She doesn't remember her fiancé, obviously.
And also,
and they just...
it's less... I don't know. This might just be me, but, like, while there's clearly some, like, back and forth between them, it never felt as, like, uncomfortably horny as the whole Shakespeare stuff was, which now, admittedly, Shakespeare was... If you ever, like, read Shakespeare, dude was... put some fucking horny shit in his plays. So, like, technically that's accurate, but, like... The way that their relationship plays out, it's never... If it is romantic, it's not romantic in the sense that, like, it's portrayed in most media. And you get the sense that they're both fine with that.
Oh,
which is nice.
It's interesting because you could, again, on a very surface level, you could take the idea of, like, oh, they're both drawn to each other because they have some type of, like, special grief or... that they're going through, and that's even, like, kind of named and, like, directly lampshaded in the episode, but it never feels like, oh, our tortured souls just relate so much. It's not that bullshit. It's just, it's neat to see how, you know, if you say, again, on paper that, like, oh, an episode where Vincent implies to the companion that they would have lots of beautiful kids together if she should ever get bored with the Doctor. Like, you read that on paper and you see it's a Moffat-era story, and you're just like, oh, great. But, like, it's not that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and you get... Like, I get the sense watching them interact that it's kind of like how I feel about, like, my really close friends, and I like that. I really like the way that their relationship is written, like, quite a lot. So, yeah, they had the talk in the pub, and you see the person who gets killed, who I believe is, like, the only one of two casualties in this episode. So this might be one of the lowest body count, like, non-Moffat pen Doctor Who episodes. there is like, yeah, and I mean, I don't exactly know how period accurate it is, but you definitely, like, one of the things that I like is that, as opposed to other historicals where, like, Shakespeare Code just pretended that the racism wasn't an issue or just didn't bother. Like, one of the things that I like is that this episode didn't necessarily shy away from being like, yeah, like, for a very long time, people with mental health issues were unfairly stigmatized and marginalized. And I don't really know whether or not, like, some people were like, oh, this feels like kind of contrived and shitty or whatever, but it's like, I don't know, man. People used to treat fucking people with mental illness extremely inhumanely. So
Yeah, witchcraft or possession, or like, it sounds ridiculous to be like, oh, your madness caused this girl to be killed, but like, that's a thing, and it's sad.
Yeah.
But like, it doesn't shy away from that, and it weaves it into the material of the story, in which, you know, you could argue a lesser writer would just be like, oh, we just want historical hijinks, just, put a throwaway line in there and we'll get on with the story. But no, it's like, it's front and center.
And I think one of the interesting things with his writing is that they portray that continually throughout the episode. Like, there's never a point where they just, like, forget about him being mentally ill.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's just
core
a part
theme.
It's a core part of his character. And I think, we'll get to the ending in a bit, but I think that ties into how it ends. Like, the fact that, no, like, that's a core part of his character that you can't just, like, get rid of.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of plays into how that ends. And I'll talk about that more when we get to that.
Yeah. So they go back to Vincent's house, and we get the scene that I discussed earlier where Vincent talks about color. And again, I like very much how continually throughout this episode, like, it's not like at the very end they just pull out the, like, yeah, you made him happy, but in the end, like, it very continually shows throughout the episode that, like, mood swings are a thing. And, like, sometimes people can be, like, absolutely just enraptured and telling you about this amazing thing to them one second and then gone the next. And it's just, like, obviously, like, it's got some sappiness to it, but it still feels a whole lot more realistic than even some shows today. Like, admittedly, I haven't seen the show, the show version adaptation of 13 Reasons Why, but I remember watching it get panned and panned and panned for years for just being absolutely terrible about this. And it's just like, I'm thinking about the fact that, like, a show where that a mental health struggle isn't even the core, like, centerpiece of the show did this better in a one-off episode, like, a decade before this whole ass Netflix series.
Yeah, it's not romanticized.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not like treated as the opposite, where it's just like, oh, I would be so much better if this monstrous side of me was being held back. It's like it informs his character, it informs his passions, but there's no, like, it knows how to balance it with, like, how real people are. Like, the minor ways in which my neurodivergency, whatever, impacts how I like music, impacts the type of fiction I like, impacts the type of art I hopefully one day want to create. But it's not like a Manny Pixie thing or anything. Like, it feels authentic.
It's not it's not romanticized, it's not over, it's not like, oh, your kindness saved this person. It's not over stigmatized. It is literally just someday, it's honest. It's some days are absolutely wonderful, and then some days are fucking garbage, trash, awful, and make you want to like curl up and stop existing. It's honest.
In an episode that's less than an hour long, and it doesn't really suffer. You could argue the alien plot suffers for like the 45-minute thing syndrome, but let's be real.
I don't even
the draw
think
of this
so,
episode
because...
isn't the alien plot.
Yeah. It's like the thing with the alien plot is like, on the one hand, obviously, yes, it's not the centerpiece of the episode, and it's not in focus as much. But on the other hand, it's still actually thematically relevant, which is a lot more than you can say for a decent chunk of episodes where the alien plot feels like a side note.
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty obvious that, like, the invisible monster that only you can see is supposed to be about mental health struggles. It's painfully obvious.
It's something you can only see, but that hurts the people around you. No, it's
incredibly thematically relevant.
And even the doctor's line about... Sorry, you go first.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we don't get a lot on Doctor Who, weirdly.
Yeah.
Like, definitely not to this extent, where the like, monster of the week actually ties into, like, the, you know, in its construction ties into the theme of the episode, into the messages it's talking about. And I think it's really good that they did that this time.
Yeah. You could maybe say that, like, for example, let's say the family of blood and human nature, like the Doctor, are assuming human forms to play out their game against each other, and that kind of ties into the themes of the Doctor of, like, if you hadn't come here, would all of these people have died? But it, like, the fact, like, I didn't think about that until just now, and I've seen that episode a lot. So, like, maybe this might just be a failure on my analysis brain, but it doesn't feel as, like, obviously thematically tied as this.
Yeah, I can maybe... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt again, but just another thing occurred to me, like the line about the alien that they're supposed to be in packs, but that this one is alone, and that's why it's lashing out. And that just occurred to me after my first point. I was like, yeah, because Vincent's alone, and like being alone exacerbates mental health issues, as we've learned in the last year.
Yeah. Oh yeah, as we all have.
Oh yes. Yeah, I was just gonna say, going back, like, the only thing I can think of that approaches this level of obviousness is, I think they're called the Isolis in Chloe Weber, about, like...
Oh yeah, and Fear Her. But the problem is that while I am on record as being a Fear Her defender, while I am on record for that, I don't think that episode is anywhere near as well written as this one.
Oh, definitely not. And going to the point where, like, at the point where it's spelled out for us, really, the thematic message when the Crephaeus is dying, and the Doctor says, you know, sometimes winning isn't fun at all, and it's like, that line could be, like, that could be delivered so poorly and, like, so obvious, but it's just, like, it's really true that, like, I don't know, at least for me, just some days, making it through the day, even though I've been having a horrible time, like, internally, like, I know that's good, but sometimes I'm just like, what the fuck am I even doing here? Like, really?
Yeah.
So, and that might be just me reading, like, too much into it, but given everything else, I think I can safely say that's purposeful and, like, part of the overall thing.
And I think to some extent, applicability is the point. Like, yes, it's written in a way that's supposed to be, like, little Timmy who's 10 years old first, like, the telly is going to tell little Timmy about depression. But it also feels it's written to be applicable. So you can relate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, we have the first appearance of the invisible monster there, where it fights. Where and it's revealed that only Vincent can see it, and there's that funny sight gag of like Vincent driving it off, and then it like the camera pans over to 11 being like ah in the corner.
I will say I think this episode balances kind of like the more childish or childlike 11 that we get like way too much of in later series, while also being like, it's clear he's a very old alien. And I know you could say that about a bunch of episodes this season, but I really felt that balance this time, because 11 does some goofy shit, but at no point did I feel like it was too much.
Yeah, definitely. And it also, again, quite like real life, it balances its seriousness and its comedy very well. It's like just like I'll feel like shit, and then a friend will send me a really stupid meme, and I'll laugh so hard about it that I will forget about like how stupid I was feeling, or like send me like something that like, or like it'll piss me off so much that it kind of snaps me out of a funk, because I'll be like, God fucking damn it. It's like, yeah.
Or like how the best rom-coms
and then sometimes
are.
you see an Amogus meme, and it's both.
And that dates this episode. This episode was recorded in March of 2021.
Admittedly, it doesn't date it as much as it should, because that really should not be lasting this long.
Well, no, because Amogus is a mutation.
Yes,
That's
but
new.
like but like a few weeks. It should have died in like 3 days, and that would have really dated the episode. But I can't stop fucking saying it. You know, if you think about it, the monster in this episode is really Amogus, because it's like they can't. It's the imposter.
As someone getting a degree in literary analysis, I have some questions.
Stellar.
We'll work on your primary sources.
Amogus.
All right.
This is a Doctor Who show.
Imagine if I just made that the fucking episode title, and everyone's gonna be like, Jeff, why the fuck is Amogus the episode title? And I'm like, you'll fucking
Well, now
find
you
out.
have to make it the episode title.
Yeah, I will. I fucking will.
Vincent Amogus.
No. All right. Yeah, 11's written really well here too. Like it's just the right level of like childlike 11, where he's looking around for the like chest mounted gizmo with the mirror that lets him see the monster, and he's like, I can't apologize enough. I thought you were just a useless gadget. I thought you were an embarrassing present from a dull godmother with 2 heads and bad breath twice. And he's so giddy about it, and it's like, yes, that's all the good parts of this character, and none of the bad.
Yeah, honestly, if someone were to ask me, like, what is quintessential 11, I would probably point to the 11th Hour and Vincent and the Doctor. I think those would be, like, my 2 go-tos for that.
Definitely. And, like, the little goofs of, like, him showing, like, him, like, being like, who is this? And it starts, like, showing pictures of William Hartnell and then Patrick Troughton. And then he holds the picture up and it can't get a read on it. And he's like, that's the problem with Impressionists. And it's like, it's stupid enough that you should be like, God damn it, but it works.
That was a good gag.
Yeah. And then the gag of him like seeing it in the reflection and being like, ah, there you go, now you figured it out, and it taking like a solid 30 seconds for him to be like, oh shit. And then Amy scaring the crap out of him. It's like, it's almost like this is the most human, and I think that's actually like something that Richard Curtis said about this episode is like, it really is written to show off Eleven's heart, whereas a lot of the time these episodes are written to show off like Eleven's head, his brain, his yeah. And I like
think
that.
there is something especially very cute about him carrying around the little guy, like the little machine.
Yeah.
And he's got him like wrapped around his chest like a baby, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's so goofy looking, and he's like fiddling with it, and he just looks like an absolute goofball.
Yeah. Matt Smith once again being a master of, like, he's one of the most like physical doctors, probably because Matt is also clumsy and coordinated as fuck, like normally in real life. Like, I remember them saying something of like, Matt kept breaking sonic screwdriver props literally constantly. Like, they'd have to get him like new ones every hour or so.
Rip.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that also works thematically of like Eleven's heart, because this is kind of Amy at her lowest point, even though she doesn't like know or remember why. And, you know, cue Time of the Doctor quote, she's the first person he saw. So it's like there's a connection there. It makes sense where we see him more open than I think we're used to seeing in later times. And that's even without getting into the Flanderization of the character. We rarely get an authentic look at 11.
Mm-hmm. And then we get to the point kind of where obviously we have like a bit of the manic pixie dream girl stuff where they're like, yeah, come and have breakfast for us. Like, we have sunflowers and orange juice and all that. But then it almost kind of, when 11 mentions like, yeah, let's like, this is what it is, let's go do this, and then we will be on our way and out of our hair. And it almost like, I'm starting to think about how it almost kind of pointedly like deconstructs what the celebrity historicals had been doing, where like it's not like, it's literally like the theme park. It's like, step right up, see the famous person, we'll do a fun runabout adventure with the famous person, and then we'll walk away, and it doesn't really further the series arc in any way or really enrich any of our characters that much. It's just a fun romp. Whereas here it's like, this is a person who has been appreciating your friendship, and you're just gonna dip after this because admittedly you have to, because you're time travelers and this is the format of the show. But it's where like them explicitly treating it like a normal celebrity historical leads them into emotional conflict.
Definitely. I think there is a purposeful juxtaposition of like the sunflowers and the brightness, and then like, and I know from experience that just one line said like a little bit off can like get in your mind and like totally cause you to spiral. It fucking sucks. And you can see it in the actor's face. Like, credit to the Van Gogh actor, obviously. He pulls a ton of nuances in this performance, where it could have like otherwise been very like one note or like cliche. Like, he gets those points. You see the flash of like, oh, you're leaving, and then when he's having that like moment in the, I guess I'll call it like a depressive episode, but he's just like, you'll leave like everybody does. Like, it ties into that. It isn't just like a, oh, depression, am I right? Like, it follows a logical format.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, we move on, and admittedly, it's a little fast, but it's a 45-minute episode, so fucking whatever, shut the fuck up, it's good. And how we get the scene where he's like, I'm not sad. Sometimes these moods torture me for weeks, for months, but I'm good now. it's just like it's so good. It's so like simple, and a lot of like it's weird because I saw like the source that I read that generally honestly seems to be kind of crabby about most episodes, or nowhere near as generous to them as we are, where it's kind of like they found it kind of overly sappy, and it's just like, are you just neurotypical or something? Do you just not have depression? Because like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Are you one of those rare people where your brain fucking works normally? Because I'm not.
I'll drink to that.
Anyway.
Yeah. And again, just him saying, oh, if Amy Pond can soldier on, so can I. And it feels, again, it's like, it's taking the trope of the historical figure being inspired by something the Doctor or the companion does, but it's not like one of the surface level, you inspired me to do this one famous thing. It's, you inspire me to, like,
continue
soldier on.
Even if it's only for a few more months.
Yeah. I was like, that's good shit. It's not shallow.
Yeah. Definitely. There is, it's also a great, you know, it also it allow this next scene here at the church allows 11 to flex his own non-neurotypicalness, where he has, oh boy, he has one of the most like Dr. ADHD moments I've ever seen.
It reminded me in that moment of the power of 3, except
yeah,
good.
that's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking too. 11 just straight up has ADHD. It's canon. He just straight up has it. And like, admittedly, so do most doctors, but like 11 especially. It's great. So yeah, 11 goes into the church by himself. There's the great line here where he's like, Amy, don't follow me. And he walks away, and after a short bit, Vincent is like, are you going to follow him? And she's like, yeah. And you know, you have the runaround in the church, and it's like, yeah, it's a runaround in a church, but it's good. It's not much of anything, but it still works fine because of the way where it ends, where like I even like, even though I only saw this like I last saw this a couple months ago, but for some reason I forgot that it is literally like the beast accidentally impales itself. Vincent doesn't even like really attack it. He just holds the easel out, and because the beast is blind, it just runs right into it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I admit one part of the episode that I kind of like I fake remember because it's not actually a part, is like, oh, this is like a lone creature that got sent here by a crack, but like nope, it just naturally flows thematically into the work, but they're still able to, you know, keep up the whole plot and the arc. Obviously Rory isn't there, and the small bit where they're in the church and it's Vincent and Amy beside him, and he's just like, okay, Amy, Rory, and it's not even like really brought that much attention to. It's a quick thing, but it's like it's there, and it stings you a bit because it's just like, oh, he did that off of like impulse.
And it's also a nice little thing of like, it shows that like, unlike something like Mickey, where there was that tension, like 11 100% like accepted, like has 100% accepted Rory as a companion, because he's expecting him like Rory's there.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, I'm pretty sure I even remember like in fucking Girl in the Fireplace or whatever, where like Ten's like, oh yeah, Mickey's here. What do we have Mickey do? And it's nice that isn't here.
Yeah.
I'm starting to like I already was like firmly Rory gang, but I am starting to come around on this TARDIS team a little bit more. Um so yeah, and then another thing that is nice is how fucking like it's like the way that the alien plot is written, it wraps up and still leaves like 10 minutes for everything else to happen, and just there to be like character stuff. And that's and it's nice because a lot of time people like complain about like, oh, like RTD's finale had this problem where the plot actually ends at 45 minutes and then the remaining like 10 minutes or whatever is just messing about. But it feels like here that remaining 10 minutes is vital to the themes of the episode.
Yeah, there's so much you could say, like, oh, you don't technically need this. You don't technically need the Van Gogh breaking down scene because he just, like, he's fine, quote unquote fine, like 5 minutes later. You don't need the moment where they're all laying in a field and watching the starry sky. But, like, you fucking do. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's, like, it's vital to the thematic and narrative tapestry that, like, culminates in the museum, both when Vincent visits it and when they're there afterwards. Like, that's all important. It's all leading to that moment, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon, but...
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and you have the little thing where they decide to take Vincent to the Musée d'Orsay and show it to him, and we really get into like the big thing that this episode does, which is, and it's actually like I forgot that they played licensed music here, and it's interesting because like the only other major time I can think of that they used like actually like licensed music in a big emotional scene was when they played that fucking one song over the credits of Rosa, and I audibly groaned because it just felt so like token generic, like corporate. It's just like, ugh. But here it actually, like, I don't know the song, but it works. And it's diegetic too, because I think it's the song that's playing on the radio of those two dudes that walk by the camera when they first land. So that's cool.
I'd have to go back and listen, but I think you're right, and I think the reason it works for me is, like, first you have Van Gogh, the actor who's playing him, does an amazing job at the reaction. The surrounding gallery is almost a perfect like setting for this scene because you can literally pan all around it. You have Bill Nye, who, you know, adds he adds talent to like everything he's in. You buy that he actually thinks this, even though he's basically being asked on the spot. And the music, I don't know, at least to me, it's almost like sensory overload isn't quite the right term, but as it's just like, as it builds and builds and builds, it feels and overwhelming as well as you seeing him be overwhelmed.
And as someone who's very emotionally receptive to music, it works very well.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel manipulative because you've spent all this time seeing him legitimately think that his work means nothing. And I think I don't know, at least that touches me personally, because when I think of like what I want to do in the world, there's always, you know, even if I feel like what I'm doing is important, there's always something in the back that's like, well, will this really last? Probably not. What's the point? And to see, I don't know, just putting myself in those shoes, if I like went to the future and it's like, no, like people know who I am. People like know my life, and like my work is on the wall of like this fancy thing. Like that would get me fucking emotional. Like, are you kidding me? I think it works because they put in the time to build it and they got the right talent to put it all together. You could argue the music is a tad bit manipulative, but I honestly think it
And
it's
I
not
think it works a
cynical and
whole,
it
as
works
I
with the
said,
construction.
yeah, as I said, it works a whole lot better than the other time that they use it. And I think part of the song choice helps there because it's like the other thing with the Rose example is it's just like that song had already been used in so many like ad campaigns and stuff. So it just felt even more like cynical and like manipulative and like, yeah, we're just going to pick this specific song. Whereas I've never heard that song before. And I think it was genuinely just, hey, I think this song really fits, and not, oh, this song's popular, people will recognize this song.
Yeah, and again, like when I think about the episode, and I misremember this, I admit I do. I think of that scene as just having regular score behind it
Yeah.
because it fits so well, and it feels like someone wrote it specifically to be building up to that moment. And the fact that it isn't is frankly kind of impressive. That they were able to make it work as well as it does. And I think what also sells it on it for me, this is kind of going a little bit ahead, but it's like you could argue that the Doctor only shows him this because he knows, like, because of Time Lordy senses that it isn't going to change anything.
Yeah.
But I also genuinely believe he wanted to show him this because he was his friend and he wanted to, like, give him a parting gift before they just went on their way. You know, and that adds to the emotion of it.
Yeah, definitely.
And sort of circling back to what I touched on earlier, I think the reason it's power, or it's like he still ends up not living, you know, killing himself is like what I said earlier, you know, that mental illness is never going to stop being a part of him, and like one experience isn't going to change that. And even if that like moment of triumph makes him really happy, it doesn't change the underlying issues in his mind.
And it's also it's very it's I'm trying to find an adjective for it. It's very like kind and about it too, where it's like even if he still died, in the end you made him happy and that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very... I would kind of think of it as like narratively and thematically adjacent to the whole theme about the It's a Wonderful Life movie, about even if you aren't doing anything grand, what matters is those individual connections. And like what mattered, even if it didn't change the whole grand scheme of his life, is that he had people be kind to him. And again, like, I think it's a brilliant way that 11 puts it, adding to his pile of good things. And that doesn't... The bad doesn't invalidate the good. And I know I'm basically just repeating the dialogue, but it's like, it really is that simple, in a way, even if it feels fucked in the moment. It's really human, and it's really, like...
Yeah.
Just a naked truth that you have to sit with, but it makes it feel happy and, like, melancholic at the same time, I guess. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but it works so well.
And it feels like, admittedly, I'm not that well versed in a lot of media, especially like film and TV. Like I know a lot more about like video games and music. But at least in the film and TV world, this feels like having it be portrayed this way, even in, I think, in art in general, it feels so rare to me. Like, I can't think of that much other media that does it like this. And that's crazy that a fucking Doctor Who episode did this. And it's kind of like one of the reasons why I have these standards for Doctor Who, because it's like sometimes you come across this shit where it's like, holy shit, nobody's doing this but this weird ass long running British like sci-fi show.
Yeah, admittedly, I don't look into like a whole lot of media that touches on mental health, mostly because I know they'll do it badly, and that triggers the fuck out of me, like unironically. But yeah, like even an episode like this made me uncomfortable at some points, but it felt authentic and it felt respectful. And that's more than I can say for like most stuff I've seen that deals with mental health in any type of capacity. Like, yeah, you have some Marvel movies that, like, oh yeah, Tony Stark has PTSD, but, like, that's basically just like a narrative point rather than like a character or thematic point. It's very not... like, again, Drinking Game, WandaVision, like, even something like that, which I think does it respectfully, like, the depth and the honesty and, like, the sitting with it isn't as there, even though I think WandaVision does it respectfully, but that's a whole other point. But I completely agree with you, Geoff. I think episodes like this show how special Doctor Who can be, and I don't know why it's personally sad to me, the direction the show has generally taken in recent years. And I like the Series 12 episode that deals with mental health quite a bit more than you do. But even that doesn't hold a candle to this.
Yeah. And I guess with that, unless we have anything else to say, we can move on to ratings. Just it's the one per season. There's always one where we spend an hour to an hour and a half just gushing about it and going in depth and being like, oh, this is so thematically great or whatever. Like, you have, it's Dalek, then it's Impossible Planet, Satan Pit, then it's Human Nature, then it's Midnight, and then Waters of Mars, and now we have this. It happens every season. It's the standout slam dunk of the season. Raw, Kino, Goat, Swag, Poggers, 10 out of 10. A+, triple S, Smoking Sexy style episode of the season.
I'm not going to repeat all that.
I wasn't asking you to.
But, this episode is virtually perfect. You could nitpick some stuff about the monster plot, maybe. But really, the episode accomplishes all it needs to and more. And maybe that's my personal bias of, like, dealing with mental health stuff, but it's just so personally resonant. And it was even more personally resonant back when I wasn't really aware of, like, my mental health issues as much. It still hit me, and it hit me even more this time. Easy S.
Yeah. So I'm sort of arguing with myself, like, do I want to, like, make it a really balanced thing, or do I want to just go with my gut? Because, like, I definitely could like be a nitpicker and be
Don't
like, oh,
nitpick,
it didn't. I could definitely, like, because if I had one criticism, it would be that it didn't, like, hold my attention through the, like, amazingly through the whole episode. Even then, I would probably still rate it a 9.5. But I think just the emotional core of the episode is so strong that I just feel compelled to give it a 10 anyways.
Yeah.
Just because, it's one of the few things that makes you tear up. So,
yeah.
Thumbs up.
Well done, Richard Curtis. You got us. Next week we have to talk about the Lodger. Fuck. Until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. You can also support us on Patreon for a number of benefits, like early access to episodes, the ability to listen in live to episodes being recorded, and potentially even the ability to guest star on an episode of your choosing. Also, bonus episodes. I'm hoping to hopefully get back into those once shit, like, calms the fuck down in terms of my schedule, especially around, like, the weekends when we usually record these. But I'm definitely hoping to get back into those. I'm Geoff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
I'm Bill Nye's eclectic collection of bow ties, and you can find me on Twitter at skyhigh9_5.
I am Amber, and you can find me and the other homies at NestQuixotic on Twitter.com.
And we will see you all next week.